Okay, let me just say a few words first about what we just talked the last 2 days. And I see three aspects in regard to constitutionalism which appear to me as very crucial. And they have a huge impact on learning. First, we said that constitutionalism and constitution building, it's a process. It's something which happens over time, which is absolutely key. Then we also said that there are some general principles which you have to recognize in a constitution, but mostly the way a constitution is built, it's usually out of a context. It's reflecting the state of a society in a government. And thirdly, this state somehow is changing over time. I don't want to say that constitutions have to be changed every year, obviously not. But to some extent, if a society is changing over time, you won't be able to avoid that the constitution needs also to be amended over time. Now, this has basically three key aspects in regard to learning, because it makes sense that when you are building or working on a constitution, that you look to the past experiences, maybe from other countries. Not only the good experiences, you can learn very much so also from bad experiences, sometimes even more. Then another important point is that you look at current experiences. So you look to the right, you look to the left. Absolutely key that you consider these experiences too. And since we said that constitutions have to change over time, the learning process on these issues has to be ongoing. It's never finished. You have always, whenever there are changes, you have to learn. So, you're absolutely right. All this learning is not just happening. It has to be purposely initiated. The knowledge in itself is not translated into action. You have to do something that knowledge gets transformed into action. We have discussed enough in the last 2 days how we had Rolls-Royce constitutions, but they were on paper. They weren't really applied and reflected in the daily life of the population of a country. Based on these experiences, we developed over the last, I would say, 15 years, a concept called the governmental learning spiral. This is a theory-based concept based on individual learning theories, organizational learning theories, but in addition also additional aspects are reflected in this knowledge spiral, in the sense that we say governments are a very complex architecture of different organizational units and individuals who live in a very specific political environment, and that has to be reflected in the learning process. You could almost say to some extent that the content to be learned, in this case constitutionalism, gives the design how the process has to be organized and structured in order to learn. We developed, I mean, these are theoretical concepts, but obviously we had to break it down in a very operational way, and we produced a kind of a template. Where actually, when I say we, means a colleague of mine from the World Bank, Bijan Nashat. We did this work for the World Bank and published actually this concept, which I want to present to you right now in a book, by the way, called The Black Box of Governmental Learning. We wanted to bring in some light into this darkness of how governments learn. Because obviously, when we say learning is not just happening, I mean, it may just happening. And governments learn in many very different ways. The kind of learning I'm talking about is really purposeful learning. There is a will to solve problems, to find new solutions. So this process usually starts with, it depends how you count, 6 or 8 different phases. The first point or the first phase is clearly always that you have to define the set of knowledge which has to be learned, the so-called state-of-the-art knowledge in regard to constitutionalism. That's a first step. In a second step, you have always to think about who has to be involved in a learning process. To be very clear, a learning process doesn't replace a democratic process. It's way more a process how you empower people, you furnish them with new knowledge in a way which will allow them to get involved, to be better informed for the learning process. So usually you have to think about, once you have defined the set of knowledge, what are the different perspectives you can have in regard to constitution building. And you have to invite all these stakeholders into the process. In a third step, it is key that you give these different stakeholders the opportunity to reflect their own perspective in the light of the presented state-of-the-art knowledge, which is presented at the beginning. And in a fourth step, you have to give them the opportunity also to share this among the other participants. That's a very interesting process because it allows somehow to validate this presented knowledge in a sense that each person participating at this learning event shares with the others his or her reflection. Means that you will have sometimes reactions where people say, the way the state-of-the-art of knowledge was presented fits completely with my personal experience. Others will say, we are outside of this experience. So once everybody has done this, you can then see if there are overlaps, patterns, where people somehow can agree and somehow almost validate the state-of-the-art knowledge and produce a new set of state-of-the-art knowledge. And in a last step, since this is again a generic normative knowledge which is produced, it has always to be translated into the specific case where these people are involved and want to learn about. Let me use the example where we worked, for example, on the issue of how you organize the judiciary system at the different levels of government in Iraq, means on the central governmental level, on the regional and provincial level. There again, the definition of the state-of-the-art knowledge was somehow that there are a few rules you should consider when you are organizing such a system. But obviously there are very different interpretations. So for this purpose, we invited to this particular learning event the Chief Justices from Nigeria, Brazil, India and Switzerland to show somehow the whole range of different judiciary systems in federations, from a rather centralized model to a rather decentralized model. And in regard to the learning participants, we made sure that the key perspectives in regard to the judiciary system in Iraq, that all these people were involved in the learning process, which means we had the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Iraq, his colleague from the Kurdistan region, from some provinces. We even had the president of the law school from Baghdad, who were all involved in this process. And as I said before, we gave them the opportunity to reflect their own situation in the light of the range of these different presented models from Iraq, India, from Brazil, Nigeria and Switzerland. And they shared these individual reflections in the group. And it was a kind of a pick and choose, in the sense that they said, oh, the Swiss model, this aspect was quite interesting. From the Indian model, that was interesting. From the Nigerian model, this was interesting. And they started somehow to develop a common sense. What may be the right way to go for Iraq? And we usually end this process in a sense that we make a kind of an action plan where they are thinking about, since now they say we learned something, that they have to think about, now we are going back, and how do we feed this new knowledge learned into the democratic process in the country itself. Okay, then let me just summarize. In such a concept, obviously this is all about learning from each other. It includes learning from the past. It includes learning what's happening right now. But it is also future-oriented, how things change in the future, and that we need to continue with learning. So in such a concept, there are no teachers and no students. Everybody who is involved is a knowledge holder and a knowledge recipient. I think this is very key. In the same time, it shows that learning in governments, it has always an aspect of updating knowledge, because knowledge in governance is changing all the time. So you validate the knowledge on a certain real-time situation and you update it. And it's somehow an ongoing process of deduction and induction of knowledge. And so it is always key that the process ends, that the new gained knowledge is translated in the specific context where it has to be applied. And this somehow gives the guarantee, or at least enhances, that knowledge really gets translated into action, and that, how can I say, that this knowledge really ends up to have impact, and not just somehow an output or an outcome, but really an impact in the long run.